doing art for your enjoyment is like, that's the best. I mean, that's always, it's so pure.
Hello and welcome to Josiah is Right. So I am just going to jump right into this because Mr. Mouse here and I have already been talking, and but mostly about technical issues, of course, that come up with doing these things remotely. But the world we live in, where I always find it amazing that because of the flexibility of this kind of technology, here we are where it's for you midnight and me 9 p.m. and we're able to have a seamless conversation through mostly seamless conversation as long as the technology allows us. So my weird introduction talking about technical hiccups aside, please introduce yourself.
Hello. By the way, I said this 2 seconds ago, but nice to meet you, dude.
Yes, really, nice to meet you as well.
Nice
I appreciate you so much being here.
It's weird. I know I'm looking off in this direction, but for the sake of introducing myself, my name is Bill Mouse. I'm an artist here in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I lived out in San Diego, California, where I was the artist and writer for Zen Intergalactic Ninja for quite a few years. So, and that's I've been in the as far as the years that count, not the years of me getting in trouble in school, but actually getting a gig in comics. I've been in comics for over 30 years now.
Awesome. So, and it's, we'll talk about Zen, but that was really, I'm working on a documentary about Zen, as you know, and I interviewed Zen creator Steve Stern. And I really, when I think about it, co-creator with Dan Cote, I don't want to diminish Dan's contribution there. Yeah. But with that, as I was thinking about it, though, the way I discovered Zen was from a comic book that you created. And at that time in the 90s, you were really the force behind Zen. When I discovered it, I found it was issue 0, really cool. Which is it's out of reach, but it's in a box just behind me, that Marvel box right there, which that box I've had since I was a kid. That's
so cool. That's so cool.
I like a lot of things come and go, but that one box is like one I will not let even though it's I had to like re-support it with tape. Yeah. And so, and
allow this interview to continue.
Yeah, it's like a test I have to pass. And so, but that comic book, which is in that box, and it legitimately is, was created by you. And it was two things that were significant. It was a signed copy that I found at a store. It was a Value City department store, and it came with a certificate of authenticity. It was signed. That was a big deal for me to find a signed comic that comic book creators, they can sign stuff for you. Like, these things didn't even occur to, 10-year-old me, however old I was at that time. And, it was fancy with certificate of authenticity. That was the first one of those I'd ever seen. Right. And, but that, like I said, that was also the first black and white comic book. And that was, I was aware of Ninja Turtles, obviously, culturally at that point. Ninja Turtles consumed my life.
That was huge for me too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I knew that it had a comic, but I'd never read that original comic. I'd never seen those black and white pages as a kid. So it was a weird revolutionary type thing for me as a kid, especially at that age, because that's when comics were getting very marvelly. And Zen would kind of in terms of the foil covers and things, Zen would kind of lean into that. When
those late 80s, that was me getting out of high school. And for me, during those years, the comics that hit me the hardest, other than like some black and white animes like Gray that I used to read, was the Turtles. Because when the black and white books were coming out, for some reason, I just found it super fascinating that they were dark and edgy. And the fact that they were fighting Shredder was like actually a life and death thing. It was very artsy to me. It was very, and then Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, because in my head at that time, all I saw was, from, the campy Adam West to what was the current DC, action adventure Batman series. It's like, you think Batman's going to last forever. And then Dark Knight comes out and it's like, whoa, these guys age. Bad things can happen to them. Bad things can happen to the other characters. And it's like, that was like a real eye opener with this whole edgy, beginning of the 90s. It started out kind of like dark and edgy because of those particular comic books for me. So I understand how you're saying it, like how it hits you sideways like that sometimes.
No, and you're totally right. And reading, and realizing it in retrospect that I was reading that stuff that had, that really maybe, about 10 years before that, maybe less, 5 to 10 years before that, when those things were happening, knew that those were changing the way comics were
Yeah,
presented and the
those were
seriousness with it was
we're talking
presented.
about plate tectonics at that point. It's like his comics were really not one way, but it's like there's it was definitely when Frank Miller came onto the scene with that. That was just like a bomb going off, especially for somebody who's 17. It's like reading like a comic that's so different and so mature. You know what I mean? It's like in the sense that the characters are like going through really bad situations that actually affects them in a permanent way, and they're getting older and they're getting like and the Turtles, when I was reading the Turtles in high school, it's those black and white books were like, because I've seen like the children's, the stuff that's geared more for kids. You just never imagined. I mean, back then, nowadays you can just imagine, like there's so much, material, there's so much content out there that you can really kind of put yourself in other characters' shoes. And it's like, oh, whoa, what if that was dark? What if that was, bright and shiny? What if that was awful? It's like, but back then, like you didn't even think that was possible. You didn't think that was on the table. It's like, oh, well, maybe a little fan fiction if you drew a little comic yourself, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden these characters are actually out there being dark and edgy and actually fighting for their lives in a way that felt tangible, in a way. It was like why is this turtle book so serious? I mean, it's like, for real? It's like, so that got me, it's like that sucked me into it. So that comics for life after that, right? So
yeah, and it's cool to see, like, again, like thinking back, and I can see how those things, the things that came before I entered into being a regular reader of comics, changed
right.
comics, and then I jumped in where that point where it was very much shifted. And I remember a significant comic book for me that kind of reflected that was G.I. Joe by like Larry Hama's work on G.I. Joe, because I at that point I'd watched, similar to Turtles, I watched the cartoon version for years. I watched Turtles cartoon at that point for a few years. I remember Christmas like 88, 89 that we got our first Ninja Turtles. I'm one of four brothers, and so my oldest brother was aged out, so he didn't get one, but my other three brothers and I, we each got our own turtle that Christmas. And so Raphael became my favorite turtle by default because that's the one I got. In terms of character, I was glad in retrospect, like he's the perfect one for me. That attitude I love. But there was a G.I. Joe comic. It was a Jim Lee cover that featured like Storm Shadow, Snake. They're like jumping out of a helicopter or something.
Right.
And in that comic, I believe in the previous issue it happened, but like characters had died, and their bodies are like draped on the front of a vehicle with like a cloth. And as a kid, that was like, whoa, this is serious.
Are you kidding? That's way over the top for it, especially as a kid, because like, I don't know, did you ever see like the Transformers movie, the cartoon movie, when it hit theaters the first time?
As a kid.
That was a bomb. I mean, in a good way. That was a nuclear bomb. That just because like, it starts off, it's like, oh, like it's in the same style as the TV show. All right, cool. I'm on board. I know what's happening. These are all my guys. Oh, but the quality is up a notch because it's in a theater. It's huge. And who just died?
Do not grieve.
This guy just died. This guy just died. This guy just got shot. Megatron just shot this dude in the face. I mean, it's like that was like, are you kidding me?
No, that is exactly that. I'm the perfect age for that to be a traumatic event. Like right. Like seriously, like that was that's one of like two movies as a kid that traumatized me in kind of like a good way, that attached to me. That one,
it made you a hardened soldier.
Yeah, and another one was the Never-Ending Story. When the nothing creature is like the wolf creature, like it's not the nothing, but it's like his emissary. That's a wolf when he's talking.
Right.
So the nothing grows stronger.
Those two things, like that stuck in my head. But again, it's these like really and I guess it speaks to why I personally love comics, and even like it kind of tracks back to your work specifically on Zen, is that you have these beautiful, bright, sometimes images of these powerful characters, but then it brings it down to a place that's then relatable and real. It's you have a big blue alien, and then how can you then have these moments where this alien ninja has like weight in terms of emotion and story,
and some empathy for him, bring it down to where it's like, oh, what if I was this guy? What is he going through? Like, he's alone, he's going through these things, he's hurt, he's trying to figure out his way through. Sometimes he's like a Han Solo kind of a badass Clint Eastwood kind of guy, but then like sometimes he's like everyday Joe, where it's just like, my ship sucks, I need to this is not working out the way I wanted it to. This is a bad deal. I shouldn't have taken this particular job, that sort of thing. So he's a very interesting character. I really like Zen a lot. So
let's backtrack slightly here. So how did you break in then in the comics? I understand you connected with Don Chin, correct? And did some stuff with him.
I connected with Don Chin. The way I broke into comics is not the typical, I took my portfolio, I saw a bunch of people, and that was always like the dream. That was always like, I was kind of gearing myself towards that, because like I was doing a lot of like smaller shows here in Virginia and entering art shows, just to see if I can get a response, see if people like my work, that sort of thing. That was like gearing up to high school. And then I moved out to San Diego because I just got out of college. I went to a community college here. And my dad was in the Navy, and he got transferred out to San Diego. So I had this choice of, well, I just got out of college. Do I just stay here and let them move out? Or, oh, holy crap, they're going to San Diego. That's Hollywood. It's like everything is out there that I would want to be involved in. So yeah, I tagged along with my parents, and I decided when I moved to San Diego that since I didn't have any friends or responsibilities or anything, that any job that I would get out there would be just something art related. Didn't matter what it was, like, climb the ladder, so to speak, right? So I did. I worked at an animation studio for a while. I worked on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes for Saturday morning TV for a little while. I airbrushed T-shirts in a mall for a while, and I drew caricatures at SeaWorld and at the San Diego Zoo for like a few years. And the way that I broke into comics, I started right away, going to San Diego Comic-Con and getting, like just acclimated there just to see what was happening, that sort of thing. One of my friends that worked with me in SeaWorld, his name is Bob Hannon, and I owe a lot to him, because he is the reason that I was actually able to get my first gig in comics. And the way that it happened was that, first of all, we always talked about comics. We're drawing caricatures at SeaWorld all day long. So we're like goofing off and this and that, whatever. So he would brag every now and then that, oh yeah, comics is like, blah, blah, blah. I know an editor. I know somebody. I know people in comics. I have friends, So I egged him on. I was just like, well, why don't you get a job? Why don't you jump out there? Why don't you prove to me that you know all these people? So he actually started reaching out, and he got a job. He got a gig doing a book for Eclipse Comics. And he told me about the book. It's like, yeah, it's like, cool. Thanks for giving me shit so I can actually get my button gear and do it. So I was just proud of him because he got the job, that sort of thing. I was like, cool. Now, technically, I know someone in comics. Point for me. He couldn't finish the job. The deadline was super tight. I don't know if other people had flaked out on it or whatever, but that job ended up being X-Farce #1 for Eclipse Comics. I ended up penciling the whole thing because I'm very fast at penciling. He was faster at inking, so that's what he did. And then the writer on that book was Don Chen.
That was the very first book Bill Mouse and I ever worked on.
So that's how I met Don.
Cool. Yeah. So that's the story that Don told as well in the Sea
Yeah.
World. He said it wasn't specific. He was drawing characters at some amusement park or something, I think is the way that Don said it. But it was funny. I thought of that was such an interesting, art is art, right? No matter what it is.
Art is art. And I was happy doing it. I was always drawing comic strips and little comic books myself at home. I'd be doing that now if I never actually got into the actual business of making comic books. That's just something that I always did. So the fact that I got into it on any level, I'm grateful for, so we did a couple of books. We actually did 3 parodies for Eclipse Comics. And then I got a call from Don, and he wanted to start something called Parody Press. And would I be interested? And it's like, of course I would be. And this and that. We've been friends for 30 plus years. Ever since then, we've always been friends. And we worked on, I'm not exaggerating, it's got to be 70 to 100 different parody one-shots that we did over the course of maybe 6 to 8 years, almost a decade, of doing Parody Press before we decided to launch Entity Comics as an imprint alongside Parody Press. So that's where Zen comes in.
Yeah, and I say I have that X Farce is in that box as well. So that's one I've had. Again, I was also since a kid. Although I can't say for sure that copy was my original copy. That might have been a replacement copy. It's hard to say that one. The lines get blurred, but I do have it, and it's cool. It was one of those ones that I didn't even realize until talking to Don that you did that comic, because I don't know why I didn't realize it because as a kid, I loved movies as well. And I was the kind of kid who, for some reason, I started watching the credits and seeing this name did this and this person, this person worked on that, and started connecting those things. And I started to do it with comic books. For some reason, I skipped that one for about 30 years with and I'm like, oh, that makes sense. That the connection to that would then come with Zen made more sense whenever I realized that. And it's like, oh, wait
a minute, he was there the whole time.
Yeah, it was like a twist ending that but with the movie in Josiah's head over here. But yeah, that was how. So talk to me a little bit. Then you did obviously a lot of the Parody Press stuff, and then
the Parody Press stuff was amazing. It really put us on the map. We did super well. Parody Press was doing well enough that we actually became our own competitor. It's almost like we were coming out with enough material that we were our own competition at some point. And parodies, they're great, they're fun, but you can't put out like 4 or 5 of these things a month for years without having some fatigue from collectors. It's like it's cool to see like 1 or 2 of those things floating around, and it's like cool. Like every month you happen to see something and it happens to be funny, roll it up, put it in your pocket, cool. But seeing like 5 of them every single month, it's like it adds up after a while. So Don, it kind of switching gears from Parody Press to Entity Comics. Entity Comics actually came about because Don Chen and Steve Stern had contacted each other about publishing Zen. And we were sort of entertaining the idea of publishing, it's like Parody Press is our imprint. So I suggested that we should have an imprint that's just for, sci-fi, action, superhero comic books. So that way people don't confuse it with it being a parody. It's not a parody of something. We don't want it to be confused. So my ex-wife, my wife at the time, we both kind of like put our heads together a little bit, came up with the word entity, and suggested that to Don, and Entity Comics was born. And that's how I met Steve. That's how I met Steve and Dan, was through Don. And of course, I've been working with Steve for the past 30 years on a million different things. Like if it's not ad work, it's comic book work. If it's not graphic novels, we've been working on something ever since. And every once in a while, it's like right now we have a Zen book that he is writing that we're going to do Kickstarter for probably early next year. So it's like, so there'll be some new classic Zen coming out, so that'll be a lot of fun,
Very cool. And like I said, the Zen was, I realized this is true, that Zen was a significant, because he was the first in my life significant. And I think a lot of fans that found that character at that time, he was their first independent comic in that sense, and that he wasn't
I
from
find that's so cool. Yeah.
these big, and knowing that, and getting to speak, having spoke with Don, and obviously talking with Steve, that it's like seeing that the course of that character, that and Steve's kind of reflected this just character that just has just keeps plugging along because of just, and for me it came down to just the look of that character. And again, and I have to say, as you defined it, like, I really love my two favorite versions of Zen in terms of the look is your Zen and the Archie comic Zen. And I love that Archie comic Zen just because he's like so squat, and it's like this little squat little dude, and I like that version of Zen. But I like yours, that it's it had this, that fluidity that you saw that came to Spider-Man at that time with Todd McFarlane.
That's exactly what I had when we first before we even started working on that issue 0, and we were actually just putting things together. Because I mean, I wasn't involved with Zen at all up until that point. So there was, like the other, there was Dan Cody's Zen that was first, which was like this cool airbrushed, real like independent, like artsy really look to him. And then Archie was really geared for kids, the recycled heroes and having the human counterpart with Jeremy and blah blah blah. When we were talking about launching the news story, I'm a 90s guy straight and through. All the guys that I was actually a big fan of, they were in the process of breaking off and forming Image Comics, and I was like, I really want to have a book that will not echo what they're doing, but yes, like I want an action book that's like on that level if I could pull it off. I want Zen to have the proportions and the musculature and the agility and stuff of a Spider-Man type character, of a Deadpool type character. It's like more action adventure, not necessarily geared just for kids. I wanted to be geared for a general audience. So I'm thinking, and that was the stuff that I was into. I was so happy to see, like how Spawn evolved from, the way Todd McFarlane's Spider-Man art went into Spawn and monsters and stuff like that, which really lent itself to like the alien stuff that I had going on in my head when thinking about the Zen stuff. And I just wanted it to be like on that level of cool, it's like, and luckily when I got a huge opportunity, because I was untested, untried. I really believe that everybody paid me to get better. I wasn't the best artist in the world. But I'm always hardest on myself, because I wanted to be so much better than I was. I'm looking up to these Image guys like, Jim Lee and Todd McFarlane and Mark Silvestri, and I want to be as good as those guys. Those guys are like my touchstone. I'm going to reach for that. So hopefully everybody enjoyed it. I mean, the opportunity that I got being untried and untested was that they let me redesign the character. They let me change the proportions of the character. They let me be the writer on the book, which wouldn't have lasted past an issue if the sales had just tanked. So luckily the sales were great. I was doing well and ended up being the writer and the artist on the book for actually a few different miniseries. I did the first series that we did. I did another one called the Alternity Saga. I did one called The Hunted, which was Zen basically being hunted by a doppelganger of himself from another universe. I was allowed to introduce my own characters into the story, which is a huge, thank you, Steve and Dan, for allowing me to do that, because I still publish those characters to this day. It's like, and I have the bragging rights, thankfully, of saying that those characters were introduced 30 years ago. It's like such a long history, and I've been publishing Nira X Cyber Angel on and off, since those days, and it's all because of Zen. So
it's cool to hear that, though, that I mean, because I was discovering these things all kind of at the same time, and at that point, as I have, to me, you're all these amazing superstar artists that are like, my first dream was to be a comic book artist and writer. And I realized I didn't have the artistic chops, and I still like to draw. And especially now that I have kids, it's fun to like draw with them, and I'll try to do, draw superheroes.
I know how you feel. I was doing that with my daughter since day one, it's like,
yeah.
I understand you. Yeah.
It's funny. There's times where my daughter will be like, "Oh, I want to draw this character." I'm like, "Okay, can I just print it out?" She's like, "No, I want you to draw it." I'm like, "Okay, give me. I need a minute or two for that."
That's a funny thing too, because my daughter, Cat Mouse, she's actually an artist in her own right now. She's actually been in the industry now for over a decade,
awesome,
professionally. And I kind of pushed her away from it. I wanted to be sure that she really loved to do this before I didn't want her to do it just because I was doing it. And I didn't want her to just pick an easy opportunity or pick an easy path just because it was there.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, if you don't love to do this, because there's a part of it that that you have to, I mean, because doing art for your enjoyment is like, that's the best. I mean, it's so pure. When you're doing art as a business, and half of your brain has to think of the business side of it, and it's kind of a roller coaster ride of a life, so you really have to love it on a level where you feel like you're unable to do anything else.
No, absolutely true. And as a writer, I just finished a novel that I'm kind of in that place where it's like, okay, I wrote this thing, what's next? And you feel that pressure of like that, this is the business side now.
Oh, you understand. You understand being a creative person, but also thinking of the business side. It takes a lot. Not everybody, I know that I don't. There are a lot of artists that really do have a very good left brain, and thank God for them, my daughter has a very good left brain. I do not have a good left brain. I just want to draw pictures. Is there money?
The world needs both kinds of people, I think. So
yeah. We need the yin and the yang of it stuff.
But just, it's cool though, thinking back to when I was discovering these things, because I'm finding it all kind of at the same time, and the image guys, they grabbed me right away. That was my I don't know that I think whenever I started reading Spider-Man was when right when Todd McFarlane did the Spider-Man where it was, he had his own issue run that was like the first that sold a bajillion copies, and then X-Men #1 and X-Force, and each of those broke records.
That's actually right when I was getting into it. I mean, as far as like really paying attention to who was drawing what, actually becoming a fan of specific artists, because as a kid, like you get dragged to the Navy Exchange with your parents, and you're a little kid, and you just have the magazine rack in front of you. So you have no idea who drew any of it. It's just magically there. So you're just kind of like enjoying the art, and you're enjoying the stories, but you're really not appreciating. Like, there was a guy that spent 12 hours drawing that one panel that you're that you're looking at right now. And then there's another guy back then, John Severin. He's actually, I would credit that artist. He was an artist on Crack Magazine. And he did a lot of gag parodies that were based on exactly the TV shows and movies that I happened to be watching as a kid during that time. So I really latched onto this guy's artwork. And I think he was the one that kind of pushed me into wanting to do sequential art. Because other than that, I was just doing, like I saw Star Wars, I draw droids all day. It's like if I saw something with monster cars, I drew monster cars all day, But as far as actually thinking of a story, thinking of a joke, thinking of a gag, I credit his inspiration. Yeah. I think the most.
Cool. And that's cool to hear. And again, like I said, it was you guys and the image crew that grabbed me with their images, and the images, obviously they picked the right name.
You said the thing.
Do they get money each time I say it? Just
they get a nickel every time you say it.
So, and I think I send it directly to them, and but just then that opened the door to find these other creators and artists, because Jim Lee in particular was the one with the detail in his art for me at
Yeah.
that time, that was just like something I had never seen. And then backtracking, you see things like, Neil Adams and what he did in terms of like bringing like this real detailed illustrated quality to the art, and then realizing like, and then they all go back to Jack Kirby with the power and the movement of all these things, and like and sort of understanding, I'm a writer, and I still am, and that's, I have a master's degree in that, and like my whole focus has been, not that I don't mean that like, I'm so great because I have a master's, but because I work really hard at the writing side of
it's good,
storytelling.
it's good for context,
And
you understand,
but then I appreciated as I grew and learned more, to see how the writing, in terms of the visual medium of communicating those stories through the images, and started to see those things and sort of understand them, rather than just, when I initially read it, I'm just entertained by this comic, and that's where it starts though. And that maybe that's where it ends too. But as I, the creative person in me then started to like, okay, just like, in a similar way, why do I like this image? Maybe I can't draw like Jim Lee, but why do I like the way Jim Lee draws? Okay, why do I like, and then kind of go backwards from there. So it's just
the reverse engineer it. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
Sure.
And I realize now,
so levels of for sure.
and your work on Zen specifically was connected in like a that thread to that, and that even hearing you say that you were trying to have that, maybe that feeling that Image did have in their art, that
I just wanted to like, not keeping up with the Joneses, but it's like, when you're in the same industry with a group of people, and then it's kind of feels like high school in a way, because you go to these shows, you see the same people at the shows. It's almost like you see the same people walking up and down the hallways when you're going to school. And it's like, there's the cool people, there's the jocks, there's the really smart people, like there's the different cliques, and you want to be accepted by them. You want to be looked at as their peer. You want to be looked at as somebody who's a part of the machine, a part of the group, and being accepted by them was very important to me. There was one time where they got me kind of good, because we did a parody called Skin 13, and it was Gen 13 just without clothes. It's like tastefully covered up and this and that. It was just for fun, for
and
kids,
Gen 13 was almost Gen 13 without clothes. So
it was. So we released that book, and some of the guys, some of the colorists and people from the studio, they came over to our table and they started looking at the book and started staring at me and just stayed silent just to see if I was like going to sweat it out, maybe call the security for protection. So, and then we had a good laugh. They're a really, really good group of guys. So it's nice. I feel like I kind of grew up with these guys. It's like, like some kind of fraternity and on some level, where it's just like, cool. Like on some level, having each other's respect, or having each other, at least recognizing each other, and just being like, yeah, I love your work. I enjoy your work. And me just being accepted, just like, oh, like I want to feel like I belong here, in this space, so.
Cool. So I guess the question is for you, from writer to writer, as opposed to the artist side. What are your steps in the process when you're going to actually script your write your comic? How do you approach it?
I approach it, because I've got 24 pages to work with. It's a very short episode, so I'm not thinking of a long story that's like like a 2-hour movie type story. I'm thinking of it in episodes, and then I think of maybe a general idea of where I want to get to. But then the artist in me is also thinking, I really want to see this scene. I really want to see this visual. How do we fit that visual in there? So the way that I typically write is like, I draw a bunch of thumbnails, and then I sort of play it in my head like a movie. And I just keep on rewinding it and playing it, until I get the movie I want. You know what I mean? Where some of the stronger beats, or some of the moments that need to be in the story, there's like there's touchstones that probably won't move, because those are things that need to happen. A certain character has to experience a death. A certain character has to experience reaching a goal, or defeating an enemy, or being defeated by an enemy. There's certain goals, there's certain touchstones that that I can't move around. But as far as the way the action flows to get there, I keep on rewinding it in my head and playing it, rewinding it in my head, playing it, thumbnailing it out, stick figures, just to see if I like the way it looks as it plays. And if I could follow the story with my stick figures and I like the way that it goes, then I start committing it to paper.
Well, it's interesting. That sounds almost like if you're familiar with Christopher Guest movies, going back to Spinal Tap and A Mighty Wind and Best in Show and things. And it's the way it's improv, but it's improv within these certain parameters that it's like,
Yes.
okay, you can play with it, but you have to know these are your sort of story beats or emotional beats or character. Like there's certain benchmarks you have to achieve, but you can allow them to play with it and then play it different ways, which, you can do that when you're working with stick figures and then this is working.
Exactly. You can change things quickly, and then even when I've got the actual artwork committed to paper and I'm actually lettering at that point. I'm actually like putting this stuff down and it's supposed to be solid. I might read through it and maybe there might be an expression on a face that the way I drew it, maybe it would be better to fine tune that dialogue a little bit to kind of reflect more of what you're seeing on the page art wise. And those are little changes that are kind of spoiled. Like, because if you're writing it yourself and drawing it yourself, you're able to make those changes on the fly, like as you see it. It's just like, the way this looks, he really should be saying this. Mm-hmm. Or you run the dialogue through your head and it's like, is that conversational? Like, would I say it would he say it like that? So you can make little changes like that. Whereas and it's not a bad thing to work with teams. I love to work with teams, but you're not going to be making changes. It's like, if you don't fit the dialogue, then it's up to me to change the art to really fit. The expression on the face needs to fit with the writer. If it's somebody else writing it, it needs to fit what they wanted the character to say. So it's a little bit more, not the wiggle room. Because sometimes, like right in the middle of a story, you might think, that's better. Let's do it like this. Like this actually flowed better. And you just, I would never want to step on someone else's artistic integrity to make changes on the fly. I would never do that, working with teams. So it's a lot of fun to sit down and write and draw. But, there's so many hours in the day, and it's a lot of fun to work with teams because there's a lot of things that working with the team of people, it brings out something different to the table than if you were doing it by yourself. So it's nice to be able to do both. I'm glad that I have the chance to do it, both ways.
Yeah. I even say like, I now being a dad and a teacher who I'm home when I'm writing, it's a much more isolated experience. And it makes me miss when I was in grad school and I would have, I'd write what I wrote and I'd bring it and we'd dissect it and people would here's this idea that's working all back and forth, that's terrible. And I'd say, no, you're wrong, I'm right. Or I'm saying, or in my head I'm saying they're right, I just can't admit it. But that sort of there's something good about both, where one, it's like, this is my vision and I can just have it be my vision and you're not tainting it. But then there's that pull, that push and pull when you're getting things, especially like I was fortunate in a lot of my classes in grad school that I had people who understood who I was and could understand what I was going for, that help, and teachers as well that could help me get that out of me and help me learn how to do that process with them so that then I could learn how to do it on my own. But so what do you have a preference then? Do you, if a writer were to give you like very detailed like script where they're pointing every pen stroke and pencil mark that you put, do you dislike that, or are you okay with it, or you just
it actually depends. But I've worked with writers who do it every single way. I've worked with writers that just give me a general breakdown and just tell me to kind of run with it, and then they'll script it, like they'll tighten up the script depending on how I draw it. Then there's people that write a script that's very detailed, panel for panel. This is exactly what's happening. This is exactly what's happening. And there's a certain comfort that comes with that. It's like when you go into it, you're not, I love to just pull things out of my head and just come up with the scene. But at the same time, there's a comfort with reading a panel and it's just like, this is exactly what's going to happen. Now it's just my job as the cameraman to position the camera. You know, I kind of wrote my flexibility comes in the fact that I'm still allowed to rotate the camera around the room and see what angle do I capture this idea with, you know. And so it's a lot of fun to be able to work with lots of different types of people, because that actually keeps you fresh. Honestly, it's like doing lots of different types of work. Even to the extent of, because I do like my typical style is real. My wheelhouse is superhero, science fiction, like the stuff that you see.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also children's books. There's also more adult books that a lot of people will never see. And it's like, and it's good to be able to do different things. Like I drew a Black History Month coloring book, and I am not a portrait guy. So I had to work really, really hard on that book. And I had to make sure that everybody was very happy with how that book turned out. And I was just like, so happy. It's like, you guys hired a Puerto Rican to draw your Black History Month book. You realize this, don't you? So, but they're like super cool. They're super nice people. And the project came out great. So portraits, not my wheelhouse, but wow, it made me stretch, and it made me work hard to make sure that everyone was happy with the likenesses and with the way the book was laid out and everything like that. And then children's books, it's a whole different muscle, whole different set of shenanigans that happens with children's books. But it happens to be in my wheelhouse. Especially, I would think of myself as a cartoonist first, than a comic book artist, because that's where my DNA started. That's where my work actually started, was drawing really cartoony stuff, like really warped. Like you would even lean it like towards like a Garfield comic strip, more, you know, more like Looney Tunes, and really warped out cartoon figures and exaggerated features and things like that. And then I would say that my limit, I don't get very realistic. As realistic as I try to get is probably about as realistic as you see in my comic books.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I have some friends that they draw realistic, and it's just like blows my mind. It's crazy how they can capture a likeness, and it looks like a very realistic, like photorealistic kind of style, whether they're drawing in pencil or whether they're drawing in airbrush or on computer. And it's like that escapes me. I wish I can get that realistic with my artwork. I wish I had that much range, but I'm happy with what I could do. And there's always something more to learn. So that's the good thing about art anyway. So.
Cool. I appreciate the like sort of getting that insight, and it's cool too, because the idea that, you know, I think it's a balance of having opportunities to do both, where you have the control, and then sometimes where you don't have the control, that you can, you know, but okay, can I do this within these parameters? And, right, you know, I when I, you know, do small writing projects for people here and there, like that kind of stuff, that's like the not fun stuff. It's a similar thing where it's like, okay, they have some business and they need some copy written or something, that kind of writing, where it's like, these are the parameters, you got to stick to it.
It sharpens your toolbox, you know, it sharpens your skills. So even the stuff that I'll work on, because there's going to be projects that's going to be like this isn't my passion. It's not what I want to do, you know. But there's always going to be something about the project that sharpens up my skills for the things that I do want to do, and it broadens me and makes me a lot stronger with some things that I wouldn't be strong with unless I had done those jobs. So that's, you know, there's a lot to be grateful for, even when it's, you know, even when you have to work.
Work, that's the worst part of it all, isn't it?
It went from enjoying art to work.
Yeah. And even like, you know, it's that I haven't been a successful writer in terms of, you know, any kind of remuneration for like writing my books and things, but I always try to like reflect to, you know, like people, it's like, no, even still, like a book that doesn't make any money or I haven't sold yet or published, there's that represents a ton of work, like and a lot of work, years of work, and especially, you know, yeah. So it's just to understand that, I think that's what sometimes is I know that is lost, and even on me as a kid was lost when I would look at stuff that you would draw and other artists would draw, that you always assume that it's completely effortless for them. or a book that, someone I admire wrote, they could write it easy, where for me it's hard work. It's like, no, it's hard work for the level of hard might vary, but it's hard work for everybody, so
I think the only hard thing with, I mean, to come back around to Zen again, because working on Zen, the only thing that I would consider to be work when working on because I was working on Zen and I was working on other titles at the same time during those years. The only thing that made it any kind of work was the fact that there's a certain amount of content I would have to produce in a given month. So there's 24 pages of this story, and it's got to be good. It's got to be whatever your best is. And I was fortunate with Zen because, and I'm fortunate with a lot of the books that I draw, because comics was something that I wanted to do, like, since I was a kid. So it was work because it was a lot and I had to stay up and I had to push through it a little bit. But at the same time, it was a pleasure because, oh, this is the thing I really want to do. And I'm actually writing it and I'm actually conceived. So I think a lot of the energy of, even if the artwork wasn't really on point, in my own head, like I said, I'm always hard on myself. I would think that, oh man, I could have drawn that better. I could have drawn it like this or like that. But I think, I'm grateful that people picked up on the energy that this kid's having a really good time drawing this book. It's just like, oh, I want to have these ideas. And I love the fact that doing conventions and listening to getting that immediate feedback from people, because the reason that I love drawing in the first place is so I can go, look what I drew. Do you like it? It's like that. That's me. The little kid in me always does that. And listening to the feedback, like I don't understand an artist or somebody who makes movies or an actor or something like that who doesn't listen to the fans, or they want to do it for themselves, but on a level that, like, it doesn't matter what the fans think. I'm doing it like this. This is my integrity. This is my. Whereas the little kid in me is just like, oh no, it's like the fans said they like this better. I should do this because they'll like me more if I do it like this. And I show it to them. Do you like it? It's like, and that's the little kid in me is constantly doing that. It's like I just watched an episode of Knight Rider and I drew the car and I run to the kitchen to show people that I drew the car. It's like, do you like it? It's got a red light.
I had a Knight Rider hot cycle. Those were like they were like the plastic 80s like tricycle things. I had a Knight Rider hot cycle that I remember distinctly. That it was probably passed down from each of my brothers too. So being the bottom of the bottom ladder of four of us, that I would always get everything last. But I remember that was one of the first things that in the 80s that I remember distinctly being a fan of, that wasn't like a cartoon.
Right. Yeah, I had my lineup. I had my Knight Rider A-Team Greatest American Hero lineup,
And the A-Team, but I feel like the A-Team for me, I would have discovered it because of the Mr. T cartoon and worked backwards from there.
Right. There's some shows that I always discovered because they were like, you'd have a show that you really loved that came on at 8, and maybe another one that came on at 10. So like you had to wait for an episode of something to get to for the one that came on at 10 o'clock. So I would discover new programming at 9.
That's such an old-fashioned way of watching anything, though. It's so funny because now everything is like just streaming and on demand, and it's such a different, like I just think of how my kids watch stuff compared to how I did, and it's funny because even 10 years ago it wasn't that way, but now
it's crazy. But back then when I was a kid, like the Buck Rogers Star Wars kid that I was, I always dreamed that the world could be this, as far as like having access to like everything all at once, the internet and all that sort of stuff. So when this stuff actually started happening, my brain, thank goodness, I don't want to be like the old guy that's like trying to keep up with technology, right? It's just like, these darn kids, get off my lawn with my 3 channels. I was always so upset that we only had 3 channels. So when it started happening and the internet actually started actually being a thing, and computers had to be faster because you had to be able to run video, in order to, like the computer that I have right now that we're doing this on, it's like, it would be like, it's a spaceship compared to what I started out on. It's like, I used to have a SideQuest disc that was like this big, it was heavy metal disc, and it held 8 megs. That's what we were doing comics on.
Yeah,
That's when we
that's
started.
crazy.
That's when I first started working with Don, and when we actually had our studio like very close to each other. We lived very close to each other. Um, we would take these SideQuest discs, and we put all of our pages on multiple SideQuest discs, because you can only fit like a couple pages on each one, and then we'd have to FedEx a box to the printer, you know. And it's like, and it was fax machines. We weren't actually like emailing each other like, you know, art, compositions or anything. Everything was faxed and emailed on stone tablets.
It's funny. I remember like even my first job out of college, I graduated in 2004 from USC for my undergrad. And my first job out of college, we still had, it was in like the legal field. It was just a job I got in Century City in LA. But I remember that I had to operate the fax machine to still send faxes to all these lawyers, because all these, they were, a lot of them were older and established. And even though email was definitely the thing at that point, and we still had to fax every single thing, and it was like torture for me to try to like fax all this stuff, that you had to like make sure each of the, depending on how many lawyers were on each case, and they had to have the same things, and if one didn't get it, because
that sound is very nostalgic, but I don't miss it.
Yeah. And then like transferring calls was the other nightmare at that job for me. But so bring us up to today. I guess we're jumping a bit, but I don't want to have you talk all night here. I do want to have you talk all night, but for your sake, I'll let you not. But so bring us up to what are you working on currently, or have worked on recently, that we can look back on or expect?
I have a non-exclusive contract. I have a non-exclusive agreement with Committed Comics, and because with Nira X Cyber Angel, we just released, we just finished the Kickstarter for Nira X Dark Seas #1. And as we call it Dark Seas, because it's the book has got kind of a little bit of a pirate kind of theme to it. We thought it'd be kind of cool for this particular story arc. And Committed Comics publishes like the actual regular edition, publisher editions of Nira X Cyber Angel. And then on the side, I publish like artist proof editions or like special one shots and things like that. So the latest thing has been Nira X Cyber Angel. We did Dark Seas #1. It's actually at the printer now, because the Kickstarter just ended, and we're just doing some of the tiers had commissions with it and stuff like that. So we're just finishing up like loose ends for that campaign. And I'm also finishing up because I still have the Entity Comics imprint. Don held on to Parody Press, and I have Entity Comics still. So I published like single issues and things like that myself through the Entity Comics imprint. And I did a book called Entity Comics Parody Division. And it's a parody book. It's a flip book. I do half of it, and then the other half, flip side, my daughter actually has a story and cover where she's done that. And we did that Kickstarter. That one is actually running a little bit late, but we're almost finished with it finally. And that'll be going to the printer soon. And then as far as other projects and things like that, just my website, billmoss.com, or my Facebook page at Bill Moss Art. I keep on posting like new things, and I got a stack of commissions that never goes away. Thank God. Thank you, everybody, for always asking for commissions.
And that stuff will be linked below as well for anybody that's finding here. That's cool to hear. I wish I had was aware of the Kickstarters, but and you did mention that hopefully next year you'll be doing one for Zen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually in the pipeline already. Steve has already written the treatment for it. I'll tell you the title and stuff like that once he gives me a little bit of a green light, but at least I'm allowed to say that we're working on a Zen book. Steve's writing it. I'll be doing all the art and color and stuff like that for it. And I'm really excited about it, because I've got other Zen stories that I want to jump into again. It's been a long time since I've worked on some Zen stuff, so I really wanted to work on one that we worked on together first, and then do that as a Kickstarter. And then after that, I probably want to do like a short 3-issue story arc, and then I'll write and draw that one, and that'll be more like the classic Zen that people were used to seeing from the Entity Comics days. So
Cool. And that, yeah, that's and Steve did talk about like the design change to Zen, and it'll come up in when I do the Zen part of the documentary with that. But for me, the character is as again, as I said, as you drew him, that was the first way I discovered that character. So
I was so
that's how it connects for me. So
that's so cool. That actually that's very meaningful to me. That's what connected you, because I was very fortunate that they allowed me to do that. Because after Archie, and I'm not sure how much time passed between where they ended their run at Archie and when he had actually approached Don about publishing with us with Entity Comics. So I was very fortunate to be able to like design the character like the way he was and have the more Image Comics action adventure, superhero kind of proportion, because he was really geared for a younger audience. With the Archie stuff, especially, because the recycled heroes and stuff. It was a cool design. It was a cool book. Everything that they did before was great, and it was well received. I love the fact that he's got a couple of games out there, and he's got the other like the toys and stuff like that. All that stuff was like super cool. And
I would say with the toys, my dream is that with the collector's toy market, I'm a toy collector as well. We're not in my garage, where if you've seen any of my YouTube videos by chance, that's where I film. It's in my garage actually, and that's where my toy collection is. I'm in the office, which ironically in our old house, the office was where the toys were, but I was like, I have a garage and I'm not like a car guy, so I'm like, I'll put my toys on the wall in the garage, and so I set it up in there, and this is my actual office that functions purely as an office, although it's got some decorations. But I would love to see a modern style, like with the articulation, in the sense of Marvel Legends, Super Sevens, Ultimates, a Zen in your style. That's like my dream toy, because I think it would be such a cool
bucket list item for me too.
Yeah, so I think it would be such a cool. So hopefully that could exist at some point in the future. Just if they make one and send it to my house, that's all that needs to happen. Maybe two, one for you, one for me. But and again, like as I said, that your version of Zen was the one that I latched onto instantly, that design, and then I went back, and first the next thing I found was the Archie run, because that was the easiest available, because at that point I don't even think, I'm sure like I sort of like, as I read some of your Zen comics, that I sort of got some of the backstory, that it was like an independent comic before that, and that was, the issues came out, in the every year and a half or so, as they, because it was interesting hearing like the process of learning from. I would love to talk to Dan Cote about it, but the process of his style of art it took a long time just to
his airbrush
to airbrush it. Yeah, exactly. The airbrush style. So, but it made,
as far as figures, I mean, I don't know if you saw the vinyl figure that they released back in those days. It was a very cool figure that was it was a mixture. They designed it based on, I think, leaning a little bit more towards Jay Lee's artwork for the cover that he did for us back then. But the figure came with two different heads. It came with the Jay Lee head, and it came with a Bill Mouse head.
Oh, I didn't realize that, because I remember seeing it, probably like in Wizard or in the ads and comics, and it's funny, I thought that it looked Jay Lee, and it obviously I wish I bought one in retrospect. Those are that's a desirable Zen collectible, and those in the Zen mask that came out, those things
I remember the
super
mask.
Yeah.
So, and then and it's amazing. I'm glad that everybody, because every artist that's been on Zen since we did the Entity Comics run, they've taken their visual cues off of what we did with the book. I'm glad that they kept it in that wheelhouse, and that makes me feel really good that stuck. So I'm very happy about that.
Awesome. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. And the microphone I hear is getting a little bit crackly. And it's so funny. You said the warning that'll, and we joked how that would be the cue that it's time to wrap things up. And as we're kind of heading in that direction of ending, but it's just so funny.
Does it sound okay now?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
a few pops a second ago. It wasn't even that bad, but it was funny that you sort of gave me the warning.
Like, trying to play me off. What's going on with the thing?
Yeah, the orchestra that you can't see below the camera here. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I'm from the East Coast, so I understand the time difference, but I'm a late night guy as well. So, if you're still up when it's midnight for me, I'd be happy to do this again. But
Gotcha.
thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it. Appreciate your work and look forward to seeing future Zen. Obviously that'll be a definite highlight, and maybe we can talk again once that is closer to happening. So
that sounds good. That sounds like a plan.